Welcome to Season 2 of Liberty's Leading Edge Conversations. I'm your host, Nozipho Shabalala. This series focuses on the future of work. Now, as the relationship between people and organizations evolve, work is more than just a place where we go to work. It's where we go to experience work. And so the topics in the series have intentionally been designed to shift the conversation away from the mechanics of employment and a lot more towards the dynamics of the human experience. And so we are sharing and gathering insights that have the potential to shape the industry for both members and employers. In today's episode, we turn our focus to the question of what does it really take to build inclusive workplaces where people living with disabilities can truly thrive? We're looking at inclusion beyond just being a metric, but rather as a human and a business imperative. I am super excited about the two guests that I have with me in studio today. We're joined by Shonisani Nephalama. She is a nutrition science lead at the Heart and Stroke Foundation of South Africa. And John Taylor joins us. He's from Liberty Corporate Benefits, and he is an actuary. Thank you so much for making the time to join us.
Great to be here.
This is going to be perhaps one of the most important conversations, I do not doubt, in the series. And maybe, Shonisani, let me start off with you. When we talk about people living with disabilities feeling like they truly belong, practically, what does that even mean and what does that look like?
And most of the time when people that have disability, especially in the workplace, when they're working, I think for them to feel like they belong, it's about them not to be separated from individuals without a disability. It means moving them from being present into participating, where they share their ideas, their values, without them feeling that they're going to be judged. It also means that in an organization, we have system as well as knowledge on how to accommodate them. And also it means that when that organization is being developed or when the building is about to be built, we need to also put in mind that we will hire people that have disability, which means that we need to include that on our plan as an organization. It also means that we create a psychological safety space where they're able to share their opinions, their ideas with their colleagues without them feeling that they're aiding a burden or they won't be taken up seriously for them.
I think it's a brilliant answer, Shonisani, because I think you've given us almost chapters of the book that we need to walk through today. I'm hearing you talking about it's not about presence, it's about participation. And I think, you know, when we talk about it, inclusion being more than just about metrics, it's not about just counting the warm bodies, but it's really the value, the quality of their participation, their voices being heard. We will talk about systems, so I'm really happy that you've raised that. And we're certainly going to be talking about hiring practices and what this means from an organizational perspective. So you've given us almost the headlines that we're going to be double clicking on. John, let me come to you now and bring this straight home to Liberty. When we say we're talking about inclusion that has a particular focus on enabling our colleagues who are living with disabilities to really thrive, what does that look like from a Liberty perspective?
Good question. I think Shoni touched on so much of it. For me, it's about going beyond passive compliance to actively saying how do we include people with disabilities into our workplace in such a way that they can participate to their full potential and capacity. It's more than simply going and approaching people with visible disabilities, and we can talk about the problems with that, but rather just not approaching them and saying, you know, how can we make this place more comfortable or giving you space to work better, but actually saying how can we ensure that you can actually live to your full potential in this workspace.
I love the emphasis on full potential because what I'm hearing you say is that when we just focus on the hard infrastructure, on the desk, on the access ramp and so on, we're missing half of the opportunity there. It's really about the full spectrum of what it means to unlock full potential. But also like the fact that you talk about going beyond passive. And so we'll talk about what active inclusion looks like. And of course, what is an invisible disability, because I think we all can sort of associate ourselves with a visible disability. I do want to talk about what we lose when we don't get all of these things right. So Shoni, maybe to come back to you first, when organizations fall short of this beautiful list that both you and John have put together, How does that take away from the sense of belonging for colleagues?
When organizations fall short of that, most of the time, it makes employers or people with disability or anyone not to will to participate because they feel like they're already excluded, already judged, which means that they won't really do the work to the fullest of what they can give because they feel like I'm just one of the members. There's nothing that the organization is going to recognize me on. It also means that people as well, they don't feel safe in that space because there isn't any belonging because they already judge themselves that whatever they do, whatever they say, it's not going to be taken seriously.
Yeah. I want to test that with you, John, because what I'm hearing you say, Shoni, is that actually participation is a prerequisite for productivity, is a prerequisite for performance, is a prerequisite for engagement, because a person walking through the corridors thinking, well, I'm not going to be taken seriously anyway, is very different from a person who is walking the same corridors and feeling that their voice matters and their contribution matters. What is the cost of compliance in an organization? You're in the business of counting things really well. What is the cost of compliance?
Let's also focus on the fact that I think a lot of the time people with disabilities, especially visible disabilities, simply do not want to be a burden. So for them, they'll say, I'll accept what I'm offered. I'm grateful to have a job. I'm grateful to be included to the extent I am, but that isn't the full potential.
Yeah.
And that for me is obviously lacking in what you can deliver. Getting back to your question then, I think, Nozi, is to say, when you are unable to unleash that full potential, there's that potential gap that you're missing out on, where a person is able to deliver to the extent that you provide for or that they're comfortable to be able to do, but fearing that, asking for more or a different way to be able to express themselves or deliver, you're missing out on all that productivity upliftment that they can provide to your organization.
So again, I think it comes back to Shoni's earlier point where she raised the question of psychological safety, which we'll talk a little bit about, because if you don't feel safe, you're not going to ask for more. Exactly. And so you almost are stuck, both you and the organization. The organization doesn't have the data to know that they need to do more, and you yourself are feeling that you need more, but there's no progress there. But let's just talk about the invisibility and the visibility in getting better at recognizing invisible disabilities. Are you seeing progress in that space?
I'm seeing progress in that you hear more organizations talk about visible versus invisible or hidden disabilities. Obviously, creating that psychological safety that people are willing to talk out around the disabilities that they have, especially when they aren't very visible. There's a mix in terms of how businesses are doing in that space. And more successful businesses are giving that space and creating that space that people feel more comfortable to come and raise issues that say, if I was able to have ABC in place, it allows me to perform at a higher level.
I'm thinking about neurodivergent thinking as an example of an invisible disability. And I think, Shoni, we're going to talk a little bit about access to the workplace, but I can imagine that difference between declaring at an interview stage that actually I'm neurodivergent, it's something that's completely invisible, at least at that stage. I'm keen to hear your thoughts whether you think organizations are getting better at the interview stage, at the access stage of accommodating both visible and invisible disabilities.
For me, I think because I was doing some reading on visible disability, I think organizations are still lacking on that, because according to the 25th Commission of Employment Equity, they published now that recently that from people that are hired that are disabled, only 1.4 are hired compared to the target of 3%.
Okay.
Which is still very low, and only 1% they are in management position, 1% it's being promoted, which means that there's still a link with regards to the number of people with a visible disability that are being promoted or being uplifted. When it comes to invisible visibility, it's something that we are still struggling on, because if someone was to go there during an interview to say, I suffer maybe, for example, mental health or depression, the organizations start already wondering, will you be able to cope with the workload? Will you be able to perform well? Then those kind of questions, it makes them that they might not select you because you have declared that you have a mental health challenges, which makes them to feel like you might not be compatible with our organizations because our workload, it's kind of like hectic, which means that's something that organizations still needs to work on, especially when it comes to mental health or invisible disability. We still have to make a big impact to be able to include everyone.
Yeah, because the numbers you share are quite startling. You know, it's less than half. At 1.4% is less than half of 3%. But I'm also hearing the opportunity here to talk a little bit about how systems can help us overcome some of our gaps in understanding how we best support prospective employees who might come in with an invisible or a visible disability. And we'll talk a little bit about leadership training so that those who are then tasked with leading teams have the capability to do that. I want to stay a little bit more on the roles and the hiring practice with you, John. Do you think that roles are now being sort of defined a little bit better, being opened up a little bit better, with the view that they can be occupied by people living with disabilities? The way we think about roles within organizations, do you see that evolving in any way?
Yes and no. I see that organizations are keen to sort of earmark roles that they believe that people with certain disabilities can more easily function in, but not necessarily to transform more roles in such a way that you can accommodate more people. And I think that's a missed opportunity where you can look at a role, reimagine it, reassess it, and find a space that you can employ people that are highly skilled in being able to deliver to it in a different way. I'll use an example. You'll find that people with visible disabilities, perhaps people that need to make use of a wheelchair, you'll say that those sorts of people are well suited for back office jobs because they can have a nice office situation where they set up that caters for their needs. But actually maybe they are incredible salespeople that you actually want out there. And there's nothing stopping that from being the case. And that's where organizations can do a little bit better to distinguish and not almost stereotype that people with certain disabilities will function better in certain spaces.
Shoni, you're nodding, and I in agreement, I hope, but I also want to just come to you with this, because I think, John, you raised such a good point that there are what are considered traditional able-bodied roles, and then there are roles that are earmarked and perhaps stereotyped to be roles that can be occupied by employers that have a disability, visible or invisible. And your call out is to say, do we have the courage to reimagine even the traditional roles? Have you seen any kind of roles, Shoni, that are increasingly sort of opening up to employers with disabilities that maybe before really weren't considered to be roles that were suitable, for lack of a better phrase, for people living with disabilities?
I think there are some roles that are opening for people with disability, but I think the main challenge is, do organizations have the tools for those individuals to be able to perform? Because they can hire them, then you just end up coming to work every day, you just sitting waiting for knock off time, but without you being productive because you're not having the tools to be able to perform your job. So that's why it's important that when the organizations build their building or the system or the workplace, they should always have the tools that when they hire people with a disability, they can also still perform their jobs. Even if they're not hiring a person with a disability, it does happen throughout the whole process that you hire me, I don't have a disability, but somehow I end up having stroke. Then when I have a stroke, what happens next? Because it means some things might have happened, because sometimes I might struggle with my speech, I might struggle with my sight. So I need tools to be able to help me to be able to perform the best or to be more productive. What are organizations doing on that?
I think it is such a brilliant question, because I think we tend to think about disability as an existing disability. And what I'm hearing you say is that when life happens and medical incidences happen that then may translate into a disability, what is the state of readiness for organizations to then better support those existing employees? Stay with me a little bit, Shonisani. Do we do we see a trend of those people exiting the workplace in numbers if something like a stroke happens? Or, you know, what would typically happen when somebody still has the capacity to work, but perhaps is no longer able to participate in audible speech that is required as part of that role? It sounds like we need a lot of work to do in terms of adjusting, but what has been your view and your observation?
I'm not really sure with regards to stats if people with stroke, they're really exiting the workplace after having it, or they're still keeping their jobs. But also it's important that once someone has a stroke, they can be able to rehabilitate to themselves today, themselves before. It's all about having an enabling environment or a workplace that able to support them. This include maybe having a clinic sister in the workplace, having wellness programs where your physiotherapist, your occupational therapist, dietitian, they come in maybe once a week to be able to have sessions with their employees, because that way at least you are helping your employees to overload whatever they're carrying. You're enabling your employees to be able to check their health as well as the support that they need. Also having things like a gym place in a workplace, it also helps, because if someone had a stroke or a disabled person, they have to have some kind of physical activity. So when you have a gym in the workplace, during their breaks, they can be able to go to the gyms, exercise, which also helps with mental health, because if they have a long meeting, when they go for exercising, it helps their body to relax, their mind to relax. When they come back after the brain, they're more than becoming more productive.
I think that's a trend we started to see some time ago, the gyms at work. But has it become more than just aesthetic and kind of like a nice perk as part of the physical space? Are organizations really thinking strategically about, one, the kind of infrastructure they're going to bring into the physical space, but also, John, the kind of partnerships, the experts, the therapists that Shoni is speaking about?
I think that there's a long road to still walk.
Sure.
I think some of your bigger employers have got the budget and the space to think about it, and some of them have walked some of that road. But for the broad majority of workers in South Africa, that is not in place. I think that that's important. What is, though, changing, and I think it's really important for me to highlight, particularly from a kind of protection or insurance kind of point of view, is in the past we spoke about kind of these life events happening, life-lifing.
Yeah, life-lifing.
And you end up in a situation where people would talk about the fact that they get medically boarded. Okay. Now that does still happen, that people, something happens in their life that means that they are unable to work. What the insurance focus has increasingly become is on that rehabilitation point, which is to say, how do we empower the person in their personal capacity to ready their home to live in as a disabled person, but also how do we empower employers to make the necessary changes, reskill the person as required, ready the workplace, and here I'm talking beyond the aesthetics of ramps and desks and whatever, but really to make the workplace workable and livable for that person in their new changed reality.
Let me stay a little bit and perhaps bring in a complication, John. In one of the episodes, we will be discussing this idea of being in a hyper-digitalized world where lots more people are working from home. From an investment perspective, are you perhaps seeing any hesitation from organizations to invest in sort of these big infrastructure, whether it's gyms and it's showers and it's physiotherapy rooms, because the nature of work itself is also beginning to shift with the hybrid model really anchoring itself today?
Yes, in the same way that all commercial kind of real estate has come under pressure as to what does the workplace look like in a post-pandemic world. Yes, the cost of putting up a gym and cost of putting up medical kind of services in office or on the factory floor becomes a big question, and I guess it differs massively depending on what industry and what kind of work you do. If you're in a kind of professional services setting, working from home becomes a lot more viable. It becomes a lot more of a kind of debate as to how effective and efficient it is, and that's where that discussion is at. Where you're working on the factory floor, in a mine, in that kind of conditions, then working from the so-called office, working at the coalface, working in the factory, that's a reality.
Yeah.
100% of the time. So I think you have to meet your workforce where they are, where the employer is, and make sure that what you're providing is a fit for purpose.
So we've spoken a little bit about the infrastructure. We've spoken about the physical infrastructure. I want to talk about systems a little bit. And maybe, Shoni, let me come to you for this. When systems are not designed with people living with disabilities in place, what are some of the ways in which we can see that exclusion happening because the system hasn't taken them into consideration?
When you talk about the system that has excluded those with disability, it might seem like it's a one barrier that's impacting, but it's small things that at the end they make a big impact. For example, if the system has forgotten about people with disability, they didn't blend them or accommodate them when they were doing the organizational structure, the teams. So a person means that the person with a disability, every day they need to be asking for something. And when they're asking for something, it makes them feel like they're a burden. And also the other thing as well, when when it makes them feel like a burden, it means they're going to stop asking because they feel they don't belong. So in a long time, they're going to end up being not asking, feeling like they're being resentful, feeling like they're not coping.
Sure.
Then in the long run, some people, if that's not working, they end up developing chronic stress because they feel like there's no tools, there's no resources to make me do my job.
Yeah.
And then I'm being excluded because I'm never getting invited into the meetings because there is no lift to get to that level, there's no that.
You know, what you say, Shoni, brings me then to some of the design choices, John, that we need to be thinking about. I mean, you're talking about an experience where a person has to continuously ask for the same thing over and over. That, for me, sounds like that should be a feedback loop into the broader system, that something's not working as optimally as it should be. And that's what brings me to the question to you, is to say, what are some of the design choices, and I think feedback loops would probably be one of those design choices, that need to be in place in order to ensure that there isn't a quiet exclusion of people, and that there's a very active inclusion of people living with disabilities. And these must be design choices that actually make a difference.
Yeah. And let's take it a step further. Who should be doing that? Very often we have a view that it is our HR functions that care for this, or it's our kind of facilities and property management kind of people that must cater for this. And indeed, there is a role for them to play, to ask people with disabilities, and again, it's easier to ask those with visible disabilities, does this work for you? Are you able to function? But at the end of the day, it is actually the job of the manager. It's the job of each person to engage with people that they are responsible for guiding and leading, to say, how do I make sure that you can deliver the best of yourself going forward? So that's the one kind of aspect, and that's the kind of feedback loop. They're small things. I mean, we saw some changes where in our business, lots of activations were happening, and in the common areas in our buildings, they would do lots of activations, popcorn machines the one day and football pitches the next day. Very exciting, everyone loved it, lots of fun, lots of noise. But guess what, for our blind colleagues, they were saying that, you know, where they previously always expected to find a kind of clear footpath to navigate through, they're now finding it's a football pitch the one day, it's a popcorn machine the next day, which is all good and well, but it did make their life difficult, just imagining how they're going to navigate their way to their desk. It's those kind of minor things that where we can engage and then understand, okay, let's make sure we keep this way clear, because this is the way that people move to get from A to B. It's those kinds of things. So everyone has a role to play, is the point that I want to drive home. It's not the job of HR. It's not the job of your facilities or your kind of property management. It's actually each manager's responsibility to drive and make sure that you don't quietly exclude people with disabilities in their team.
And I'm going to get to how we reimagine this outside and bigger than the HR role that you've sort of led us to. But thank you for such a practical example, because I think everybody listening, I can see the palatable excitement at the different innovations and changes and activations that are happening in the common area. And it is just so easy to be caught up in that excitement that we're not thinking about who's not here.
Yes.
And why is it that they're not here, and who should be here and now can't navigate their way around because of this this activation. But you said something else, John, earlier that has stuck with me, and this idea of workplaces having to meet people where they're at. And that brings me to the question of how personalized should the support be? Because what we're hearing now is that even as we think about our colleagues living with disabilities, that there isn't a standard approach. That this is how we accommodate people with disabilities. There has to be a level of personalization and really seeing people as individuals. And Shoni, I want to come to you with that and to say, what are the ways we could do a better job at this, so that the support that, whether it comes from the well-being team or the broader organization, really sees people as individuals and doesn't create a homogenous group of those people with disabilities, because those disabilities are just going to be all different in any event.
I agree, because when it comes to wellness, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everything needs to be personalized, because remember, things change and people handle work stress, challenges they're facing differently. So it's always important that each and every day, like John mentioned, managers needs to check in with their employees each, probably once a week, give feedback meeting, as well as just to check the well-being, how is the person is, so that at least you find that what can you do as an individual, it can be a colleague, a manager, to support the person to perform their best. So it's always about checking in with the person that's personalized, as well as making sure that each and every person, they're given tools as well as things to work with that will be suitable for their needs as well as for their wants, because that way at least we'll be promoting them to be more productive as well as to perform better.
I almost feel that you guys have already watched our very first episode, because John, what we spoke about there was authentic leadership actually, and that the most effective leaders in an organization are the ones that are not just managing for outputs, but they're managing people, and they're seeing people in their wholeness. And I think it brings me then, it gives me a nice bridge to start talking about how do we better support leaders who then lead teams where there are people with disabilities. Bring us back into the Liberty environment and talk to us a little bit about what are some of the initiatives to support, to train, to empower, to develop the capacity to lead inclusive teams.
Yeah, but I think there are two main aspects that I want to touch on.
Yeah.
The one is empowering managers to know how to deal with people with disabilities in their team. And that means having the courage to have the conversation. Far too often, I think, especially if you are new to dealing with people, particularly with visible disabilities, you feel like there's something that you should know what the person needs without asking them.
Sure.
Because we feel like it doesn't show empathy if I don't know already what you need. And that's totally untrue. It is imperative that we engage with our people and say, how can I make sure that we deliver the best for you from the base levels of these questions? So don't assume that you need to know all the answers as a manager or as a colleague of a person with a disability, number one. And that is a big part of the kind of training and the engagement that we have with especially new managers. And then add on to that to have the required forums to engage as needs change, as roles change, and as people's disabilities change. Because again, Johnny spoke to it, these are not static things. What I need to function optimally will change.
Sure.
There will be recovery and recuperation and rehabilitation in some aspects, and in some aspects I'm going to need more and more help as time goes by.
I think you've actually spoken about something incredibly important, and that is the burden of thinking that I need to know without the conversation taking place. And it's so important that we release people, managers who themselves are people, from thinking that they carry that burden of having to know, because I can imagine that's what then creates the distance and the gap of not initiating the conversation and then building the trust and the empathy. But I also like the idea that you're saying beyond just the human-to-human interaction, we must have platforms, forums, spaces where challenges can be shared, where best practice can be shared, and also as things change in the organization, we can almost revisit and reimagine where the organization is at. I want to bring that back to you, Shoni, and say, what are some of the leadership behaviors that you think make the biggest difference when leaders are empowered and leaders have the requisite skills to lead inclusive teams?
I think when it comes to leadership, especially leaders, they need to know that we as employees or anyone, we don't copy what's on HR policy. We usually copy how you behave, how you do your work, how you treat all of us as employees. So this means that we need leaders that can be able to listen as well as act on what we are saying, especially if it comes to our well-being.
Yeah.
Because if, for example, if maybe I'm not having a great day, or that day maybe I'm suffering from anxiety, I need a place where I can be able to feel safe to come and tell you that I'm not feeling well. Can I take a day off so that I can be able maybe to consult to see what's happening?
Yeah.
We also need leaders that can be able to ensure that all the employees are treated equally. There's no stigmatization, there's no discrimination. And if it does happen, we need leaders that can be able to call a meeting to reprimand those that are causing that stigmatization
Sure.
as well as discrimination. We also need leaders that can be able to be part of the team. Because when you're part of the team, you're able to listen to the needs of your employees, as well as how best you can be able to support your employees to be able to be more productive, and that we are treated equally when it comes to opportunity growth, promotion, as well as training. All people, disabled, non-disabled, we should all be given the same opportunity.
Yeah, I think the both of you have done such a beautiful job of landing ownership without even us having to talk about it. John, you spoke about leaders having to understand that this is not an HR function, but it is a core responsibility. It doesn't sit with facilities. It doesn't sit with HR. And what I'm hearing you say, Shonisani, which I really loved, is that people are not going back to reference the HR policy. They're looking at you and your behavior, and that sets the tone in the culture for whether this place is an inclusive environment or not. Let's wrap it up now by looking to the future together. And maybe Shonisani, I'll let you go first, and then John, you can take us home. When you think about the organizations of the future, what do you think is going to be the biggest difference between those that are able to truly support diverse teams, to be truly inclusive, and where people with disabilities can truly thrive? What do you think are going to be the characteristics of that organization? And the exact same question to you, John, as well, but to Shoni first.
I think for organizations that will thrive in future, it's organizations that when they build, even if they've already built, it's organizations that will be able to accommodate people that had visible disability, and those that maybe throughout their life they end up being disabled, or those with invisible disability. Even though we are now moving to more space of people working from home, we need to have some kind of check-in or wellness days, or just to say, you know what, as my employer, you are allowed to come to the office. We have a nurse or a psychologist that you can contact through a meeting. You can meet with them to be able to help you to perform better, because remember, mental health as well, it's very important, because when people are not heard, or when there's no space to say how I'm feeling, people are not going to be able to perform the best. Yeah. But if you have that open system that we have contracted this wellness place, if you feel like you need one of their team members, multidisciplinary team, contact them. Sure. Another thing that's also very important that organizations will thrive is to also have an environment that promotes healthier behaviors. This includes physical activity, healthier food saving, where in a cafeteria where we sell meals that are healthier, having water stations in the workplace, as well as trying to protect people that are not smoking from those that are smoking. So that's all the things that we need to do at the end of the day, that we also need to consider the well-being of each and every person individually, as well as give them the platform to do their best, as well for them to perform their best.
What would you add to that?
Sure, so many things. So many things that you covered that. For me, it's about getting practical and saying that we still live in an extremely unequal society, even disabilities aside.
Yes.
What suits in one situation is not going to suit in another. So, for example, providing access to medical care on site works fantastically if your employees are on site.
Yeah.
If they are not, making sure that they have access to virtual health consults, virtual advice on a medical basis, trauma counseling, all of those kinds of things become critically important. So there are ways in which you can deal with that.
Yeah.
Add on to that, we continue to talk and record kind of our conversations and engage more broadly on these. I think that will open a lot of eyes to what is actually happening and what can be done, because a lot of people do become despondent that they've I'm able to work because they've made the bare minimum, because that's what they think is required. Remember, coming back to that thing of asking the question.
Sure.
So engage with people to say, does this actually meet the need?
Yeah.
And we're going to need to see more and more of that than simply saying, I think I've put in place all the things, at least when I check online, that these are the things that I get told a person with this particular disability is going to need. Engage one-on-one, because as you say, each person's needs are unique to what they're going to need, and we're going to see more of that. And businesses that do that are more likely to succeed.
Absolutely. A business that creates a conducive environment for real, meaningful conversations where psychological safety is present are going to stand out in the future in their ability to create inclusive environments where their employees who are living with disabilities are enabled to thrive. This has been a Liberty Leading Edge conversation. This is where we explore the future of work, and this is where we close the gap between employment and the experience of employment. My name is Nozipho Shabalala. I'll see you at the next one.